Hello, it's Noel Vortex, and as promised, there's quite a lot going on in the world at the minute that involves Russia and the war. I'm going to do a vlog on this subject because probably another one's been a long time coming, and obviously as anybody who's going to have an opinion on this because it's one of the most important pressing situations, conflicts in the world today. It's getting quite dramatically worse. We've seen all the protests in major Russian cities, 1,300 arrests, and a partial mobilisation call up a few days ago, as well as the threats of nuclear annihilation for parts of Ukraine, which is, we don't need to go over how bad that is to threaten such a thing, but anyway, it's going to be a little more personal. I'm going to talk about the first part of this video. I'm going to talk about my personal time in Russia. Also, this might be quite long, just get ready for it. Also about a bit of context for my time in Russia. Talk about it from political angle, what I noticed happening there, and then I'll proceed on to a more general analysis of what's going on at the minute, from the political to the personal. So yeah, strap in for that. So a little bit of background. I was an English teacher and I taught in Russia for, I think it was 2.5 years. My visa is even still valid. So, well, if you want to see serial killer, there we go, there's my the Joker himself. But also, yeah, I had a visa twice. So I had the first time I went there, that's actually my older one, I had a 3-month visa. I was going over there to do what I was going over there to do. This visa for Russia is still valid, but I don't think I'd really want to go over there now, and I don't think they'd really appreciate it. British Duraki going over there right now. So this is actually still valid. This is a 3-year visa, and I can, if I wanted to, which I definitely don't, go over there, I would still be valid up until I think 2 months to go over there. So how did I get such visa? How was I in Russia for just over 2 years, I think it was, if my maths or my memory's always so bad, especially with dates and stuff. So yeah, I was an English teacher, but then how did I actually become an English teacher? Why would I go to Russia of all places? So I'm not going to go into too much details here, but I was involved I had a relationship. So I was involved with a wonderful woman who's also involved in trying to advance liberalization and just change things for the better in Russia. So I got an education from her. I won't mention the names just because I'm very paranoid about mentioning the names of people who are against what's happening in Russia due to the circumstances. But I met her online, obviously. We started off really as pen pals, more than anything else. I never expected it to get any further than that. I just found her an interesting person, obviously attractive as well, but we had a good conversation, and this went on for many months. So she was like my main pen pal. At the time, my life was a bit of I was early 30s. A lot of this, I think this happens a lot to men in their early 30s. You just you're in complete jopa. You're just like a bit lost. I sort of was just started living with my parents again after living in Manchester for quite a long time. And I had a bit of a downfall in Manchester. I have dealt with mental illness a lot, so I was on a downward spiral. And she was basically she became very much just someone I talked to all the time, every day. And it was quite sweet. We started sending gifts to each other. Very sweet, actually, start to a relationship. Things progressed. We met in person eventually, and a relationship was formed. Then moved in out of my parents' house into a place with my mate. He had another room, so I had permanent lodgings, which was not my parents, because my parents are lovely. My parents are lovely, supportive people, but no one wants to live with their parents when you pass 30. It's just the reality of it, if you can help it Anyway, so long story short, I got involved with this woman romantically, and we had the opportunity. We were then engaged in a long distance relationship, which is not easy. If anyone's ever done a long distance relationship, you'll know from experience it's sort of agonizing. This is really also, I can say this with confidence, she was the first woman I've ever really, truly, deeply loved and fallen in love with. So it was a wonderful experience for me, actually. I started to learn Russian a bit. Мой русский не хороший, a bit ладно, understanding, like, basically. But I started to learn a bit of the language. I started to learn more about the culture. Long story short, eventually we obviously wanted to live together and take the relationship into the next stage, right? So we'd been travelling around a bit. She'd come over here a few times, the UK. Obviously we travelled around Europe a bit together as well. She had a friend in Europe, so we went to a place in Europe and obviously, like, long distance can be turbulent. There was a bit of turbulence as well. It was very difficult at times because of the distance. You really have to work if you're doing a long distance relationship to make it work. It is a lot of work, no matter what anyone tells you. Communication. It did help us to develop our communication skills, and we did get, I think, very good at just being brutally honest with each other. Russians in general are very good at this anyway. They tend to be very direct. One definite positive I can say from being in a relationship with a Russian woman is, if, like me, you appreciate directness and a lack of game playing, Russian women are good for that, or Eastern European women in general, because they're very direct. They're going to call a spade. Not in all cases, obviously, and this is not about that, so I won't try and mull on that too much. But anyway, I'm cut to the chase. It's only been 7 minutes. So I ended up eventually living in Moscow. I was teaching English to children at a summer camp. That wasn't all the time. It wasn't my only role. My main basic way of making money there was still what I do today. A programmer. Programmist is Russian word for programmer. So I was working basically remote, and there were certain periods where I was teaching English to Russian kids. So I'll talk a bit about that experience. That was a very rewarding experience. Very trying at times, very draining, but I made a lot of friends from the camp who I worked alongside. It's a summer camp basically in the Russian forest, and I met a lot of interesting Russian teenagers, see. So I made friends with a lot of teenagers who are Russian, which means that I do have a unique experience in some way of having a sort of general feeling of the Russian, like, you know, what do the Russian youth think about Russia as a thing, and also how do they see themselves in the world. I think, and this is probably the interesting part for anyone who looks at this politically, a lot of the Russian teenagers, whenever we tried to obviously avoid politics too much. It's not a political camp. We had no political agenda. It was the agenda there was to creatively teach English. That was the main thing, obviously. But these conversations do happen. In general, when I was there, and this was a few years ago, they had like almost like a ironic take on Putin and all what's going on. At the time, there was not the war as it was now, but they almost like had probably something they've inherited from their parents, where they see politics as almost like a joke. So they almost know when anyone's saying anything on television, it's absolute bullshit. So, I mean, not all of them. Some of them had that sort of patriotic, nationalist sort of leaning. Not a great deal, to be honest. Most of them were like any other youth. They were varied. Some of them were quite punk in their expression. Some of them like a lot of interesting music. Some of them got me into a lot of good music. I said I got into Kino, also like a Molchik Dorma. Probably some of it from talking to these teenagers and getting to know them. And they were like any group of teenagers. There's a variety. You've got. There was one kid I was very fond of. He was quite nerdy. He stayed with us for many months. I won't use his real name. I'll just call him Alexander. It's not his real name. But he stayed with us for many months. He had quite a difficult family upbringing, but he was a sweet kid. A bit nerdy, a bit awkward, but funny, you know, like a funny kid. So I made a lot of these friendships really with these kids, and I was just trying to teach them English. I was trying to teach them a bit about our culture as well, the good parts of it. There are many bad parts of the English culture too, but I was trying to tell them about, you know, so I taught them a lot about poetry. We got into poetry, talking about film, history. So I tried to take all these aspects into consideration when teaching them English without going over the top of it, right? Sometimes I think I maybe did. Like sometimes I think my girlfriend at the time would get quite frustrated. She's like, what you're trying to teach them it's the wrong way to do it, and she's a much more experienced English teacher. You know, this is too complicated for them. This is maybe too much. So it was an interesting experience overall. So further on, so I lived there for 2 years. I never experienced any discrimination. People in Russia were mostly just interested why I was there. They're like, you know, why the hell have you moved to Russia of all places? Really, I never meant to live there forever. And I did only live there for like 2 and a bit years. Quite a long time. You know, through the COVID crisis as well, I experienced that. Which, in all honesty, wasn't that bad because Russia didn't do really much of a lockdown. It was a very short-term lockdown. And yeah, we felt it when we couldn't go out, and we had to order takeaways for I think 2 months, but it really wasn't that bad. I mean, you know, wear masks a lot. It was nowhere near as bad as the UK. It was quite strange. I experienced that in Russia, and I missed a lot of it because I know in the UK it was quite severe, the lockdown. What was it like living in Moscow? To be honest, pretty fine. The main thing I struggled with was just language, being understood. I never really had any trouble. I did probably walk past a few gopniks and stuff, but again, it never bothered me. It would have been very different now, I imagine. There would have probably some, you know, the gopniks or whatever would probably treat me with aggression, if not mocking. But probably worse, I guess. But again, there's speculation on my part. I never really had any negative experiences. Most people were just curious about what brought me over here, and, you know, most of the time I just said Женщина, like as a woman, basically. Not women, but a woman, basically. Because yeah, I was, you know, I was a loyal man. Like I was in love with this girl, basically. So anyway, it's going to be quite a long story. I just want to get it all reeled off, I suppose. Let's go further on. So I said I would talk a bit about my background there. This is going to be a long video, just wait, this is the second part. So the political situation now. So we're 6 months into the war. I found there's many vlogs where I've talked about the start of it, when I was vlogging about it when it started off. I did see that there was an authoritarian state developing in Russia, which did concern me. I knew that there was the border conflict with Ukraine, which had been going on since 2014, basically. Never really thought it'd get to this point. I was worried about it when the intelligence reports started coming out about the build-up of force on the border with Ukraine. That did give me a lot of pause for worry. To be honest, now with the partial mobilisation, well, it's terrible because, well, it's terrible for Ukraine. They want these invaders out. They want just the general to be able to rebuild their country. So, you know, the last thing they need is another wave of soldiers being sent to them and more bombing and everything else. There's already been atrocities which have been well covered in the media, you know, mass graves, rape, terrible things basically. Secondly, it's also bad because there's many dissenting people in Russia who don't want to be involved in this war. I mean, you can look into other videos, there are, obviously there's a variety of opinions, but there's quite a significant number, especially amongst the youth, of people who do not want to be involved in this war. I'd say, generally speaking, I never really experienced anyone who's really that pro-Putin in Russia. I tend to mix in circles of people who are well, for Russian standards, they were politically liberal or libertarian, or what would broadly be defined as the opposition. That was probably due to, you know, my girlfriend at the time is of the opposition. She doesn't agree with Putin. She hasn't done for many years, like even going way back before the war. She's been a vocal advocate for reform and, you know, an end to autocracy in Russia. Even our relationship started off discussing a lot of politics because, and I got an education actually. In truth, I got an education in politics from her and her comrades in a way. Her circle in some ways, and just generally people you meet in Russia. Where was I? So. Yeah, I mean, obviously what's going on now is terrible. I obviously fully support the protests in the cities in Russia. They don't really have a choice. A lot of, these young men do not want it. Like, the thing that saddens me the most is that there's like a lot of the teenagers I would have taught during my time in Russia. I mean, depending on how this partial mobilization goes, there's even a possibility that some of these poor guys, these are intelligent guys. Like I remember one kid, again, name changed for reasons because I want to protect him. Let's call him Ivan. He was, I think he was 16 basically when I first met him. He's like into rock and metal, very much into the rock music, which I'm also into. So I had many good conversations about rock and metal. We just exchange music. Some of my older school metal stuff, and he did tell me about all these new metal bands I didn't know about. Quite a progressive man, really interested in learning guitar, also performing, and then basically a sound guy, very good English as well. He would now potentially, I mean, if the mobilization gets broadened, but the situation is difficult at the minute because we don't know exactly. We know that. On paper, the mobilisation should only be applying to reservists, right? So it's men between, I think, the ages of 18 and 65 with prior combat experience. But there are already stories coming out of protesters being forcibly drafted. Again, I can't clarify if that's true or not because I don't know, in all honesty. But there is, and a lot of they're not getting drawn from Moscow. They're mostly getting drawn from eastern areas, more remote areas of Russia. Which is also a terrible thing, just like it's like viewing human beings as disposable. You're not one of the affluent Muscovites, so let's get you from the east. It's all terrible, really, overall. And obviously, we wouldn't want Muscovites to get drafted as well. Just end the draft in general. I mean, or the mobilisation, the terms are particularly. But it's a very terrible situation. I left Moscow last year. I think it was November time, so I've almost been gone a year now. Obviously, it seems in hindsight I made the right decision. I think I've already talked about these in previous videos, but there's a lot of reasons I left. I hadn't seen my family for a long time, like an awfully long time. I hadn't seen my grandmother for a long time, who's now quite ill in many respects. My family getting older. My parents are a lot older. My parents aren't getting any younger. I've not seen them for 2 years. It was difficult. I did have a sense of isolation in Russia, certainly. I found it hard to adapt. It's culturally very different. The language obviously is very different. It's less of a liberal place. I'm quite a liberal, progressive person. I'm fine with gay people. I'm fine with anybody really, as long as they're a sound person, is basically my philosophy. Obviously, gays in Russia are just repressed and oppressed. Though interestingly enough, and I think I talked about this in another video, I did see lesbian couples who are obviously lesbian, who were together in Moscow. For what it's worth, I'm pretty sure I saw women kissing each other on the lips, in the way that couples kiss. I've seen that, and holding hands and shit. So I think it's more gay machina who would get the shit, beaten up and stuff, and they have to do it all underground. That's a bigger conversation, but obviously I hate that. I think it's a horrible, repressive way to treat anybody. But this isn't a video about that. This is a video about the bigger political issues. What's going to happen next? Nobody knows. Obviously it's another escalation from Putin. The chances of a genuine groundswell of, an attempt to overthrow Putin is unlikely, but this will not help Putin in many ways. As soon as you've got families who are losing their children and their fathers, and all the male figures in their families start getting injured from a wider population of the Russian population, that will probably politicize people somewhat. A lot of the problem has been, I think, that there's always been this agreement in Russia that, stay out of politics and we'll just look after everything. People are, in a lot of ways, a lot of people are depoliticized, or they basically just get this information that's very warped in Russia of what's going on, and the informational space is very squeezed there. It's a propagandist environment they basically brought up in. There isn't any freedom of speech. Just look at what's happening to the protests, right? So people are very squeezed, but information does get through. But yeah, people are just, a lot of people there are depoliticized, but this might actually activate them into action, because you can imagine if your family, extended family and friends, once this even force gets mobilised, the 300,000, that will potentially activate people to. There's already been mass protests, bigger than before, from what I remember, for the anti-war protests. Now, if you scale that up, when these forces are eventually trained, and the harsh reality of this is, a lot of the trained proper military of Russia, many of them now are injured and killed. So these are not going to be veterans, and they're going to be going up against veterans of the Ukrainian forces, who also have more to fight for, because they're fighting for their very freedom. They're fighting for their very existence, and they've already had lost friends and family, defending just their basic right to the territory and their existence. This is a very complicated conflict in that sense. It's not like they're conscripts or drafted men, a lot of whom probably don't want to be there, whose morale. You can watch interviews on YouTube if you find them of Russian troops who've dissented or left the battle, somehow escaped. There's one interesting one I saw of a guy who was, I think, conscripted, just saying how terrible it all was and how he didn't want to be there, and this is all a crime. And there is a lot of that in the Russian army. There are dissenting Russian soldiers. Yeah, some of them are complete bastards, right? I understand that, but Russia are also so desperate now to be drafting from prison populations with the Wagner group. Look into that. It's fucking there's a ridiculous clip of this guy basically saying, join us, 6 months, you'll be free after. If you desert, you'll get shot. Pretty much just straight up says that. It's not even no real ambiguity there. Join this group, we'll let you out in 6 months. You'll sending convicts into a bloody war. It's desperation. This is all pure desperation from Putin. He's losing this war, and he's unfortunately escalating it. And if the cost is more Russian men, who don't even want to be in this war, getting sent to war, it's fucking horrendous. I mean, he does deserve to be tried for war crimes, if he reaches that point, hopefully. I think he should answer for his crimes. He's ruined his country, the economy, the sanctions. Well, young men already thrown onto the altar, sacrifice, and the many more, maybe, who will be thrown. He deserves no pity. He is a terrible human being. He is a tyrant. Anyone who stands for that guy is a fucking idiot. Anyway, that's all. I've talked quite long there. It's almost 25 minutes long. I hope that gives a little bit more background and context to my own time in Russia that I spent there, why my reasons are that I went there, and just some thoughts on what's happening now. Obviously, no war, don't want any more war. The Ukrainians want them out. The Ukrainians just want peace. I mean, I think the Ukrainians are getting tired of this, having to repeat this again and again in Zelensky's speeches. You see, he's looking tired. The reason he's looking tired is he doesn't want to be here. I mean, Zelensky before was a sort of centrist politician. He had some internal issues, somewhat, but he was like a centrist politician, right? He was just trying to do the best for his country. Certainly wasn't a Nazi. This fucking narrative that the Kremlin pump out about Zelensky and being whatever, like the Ukrainians in general being Nazis is pure nonsense. Yes, there is I've already covered this before. There is a minority nationalist component of Ukrainian political system. It exists in nearly every single political system that has a democratic parties, right? That exists in the UK even as well. We've had I won't revisit this. Anyway, everyone knows that sort of nonsense. But yeah, I'll end this video here. It's already quite long. That just gives some of my personal thoughts on what's going on. In terms of how it can stop, probably the only choice, unless, you know, I would implore actually, if you're a Russian man of draftable age, try and get out of there, actually. I don't think that's wrong at all. Even though the flights, it's getting narrower and narrower, the window of opportunity to get out. I'd say if you can, get out as soon as you can. You don't want to die in a meaningless war. If possible, escape Russia. And you've got nothing to feel guilty about there. Any rational-minded person would do that. You know, the alternative is just dying or getting injured in a meaningless war that you didn't ask for and you don't want, probably. So, yeah, try and get out if you can. Still, I mean, like I'm losing. I get annoyed like sometimes because not annoyed, but like I've made several videos where I've been saying to. I've been thinking this was going to happen in a way for a while, and I've been wanting to get, you know, Russians who dissent to get out. But then also at the same time, I do recognise there is a desire for dissenting Russians. They do want to fix things. They have that hope still, and that's admirable, you know. I mean, you've got to give props to the dissenting Russians who remain there and are brave enough to speak out. Amongst them, like I said, the woman I lived with for several years and was involved with, she's also still in Russia and still speaking out and still protesting. Though at the minute she has to be a bit more careful after her last arrest. I'm not going to go into details. I do not want to share anything that could be compromising about her. That's the only reason I do not name her directly. I just don't want to put compromising information about her in the public sphere, if that makes sense. It probably does. I mean, it's basically just a protective thing, just in case. Anyway, that's that in a bit. That was quite a long video. I know it's quite long, but yeah, I think it's important just to talk about what's going on. Anyway, bye.